Today we're going to be talking about the fundamentals of a successful farming venture regarding the soil. Soil health, what does it entail when we look at the principles of farming concerning the soil? We know very well that it's finite. You know, and it's really important for us to be able to take care of the soil. So, at the first slide. So, generally, that's the outline of my presentation, the soil properties, the conservation works that we are supposed to do. We are going to look at soil analysis, the soil testing principles that we need to employ, and we are also going to look at the soil amendments. But if we can what then do we use to make sure that we condition the soil to the state which we require it to function well? And also we are going to look at the nutrition for various crops. Could fertilizer for your different crops so that you get the best yields. So to start off, what's very key for every farmer is to do with planning. You know very well that so this is what you want in terms of planning. The soil, choice choice fertilizer, choice my decisions, it's not my good agronomic practices. The irrigation systems that you put in place, they are very key, and if you plan accordingly, you'll be able to implement. Mr. Ivan Craig, and it's important for us to be able to start planning right before time. When the time comes, when the appropriate time comes, set in motion what we would have planned. So, what's key for us farmers is to understand the weather patterns. Right now, we are faced with an El Nino, and I know that most people, they are a bit jittery. We are going to have severe drought, we are going to have my heat waves, but it's really important for us as a farmer or as farmers to have decision-making tools, one of which is to do with knowledge, my weather elements, and also to do with the soil. So, like I said, we are anticipating in El Nino for the 2023-2024 season. Continue updating yourselves into the weather patterns, effective moisture, and decision or time to sow the seed. What this typically means when El Nino comes in Devzekut, you are going to have moisture stressed crops. We are going to have heat yakawanda, and that heat usually leads to wilting. Wilting temporary, permanent. That the crop is but we can prevent that. Put in place the appropriate measures. But one important factor here, uptake of nutrients. If you don't have enough moisture in the soil, your uptake of nutrients is going to be limited because of the solubility. Yema fertilizer reduced moisture. So for us to be able to understand how do we circumvent against these three factors, what do we need to put in place for us to have a functional soil? Next slide. So we're going to look at the soil properties. Basically, the soil is divided into three. We're going to look at the physical, the biological, and the chemical properties of the soil. And it's important for us to be able to understand it's because of the different aspects, the climate that's there, the topography or outlay, the time and parent material from which the soil is formed. So these factors, they then come up and give us what we call those three factors, the physical, chemical, and biological properties of the soil. So looking at the physical properties, 5 properties which you must master. Yekutanga is just to do with the texture. Is it a sand soil? Is it a clay soil? Is it silt? Or it's a clay loam or what? It's a combination of those three factors. It's an arrangement. You put my aggregates, my proportions, a sand, a silt, a clay within that soil. Then you also look at the structure arrangement of those three textural characteristics which you have said, and also to do with porosity. porosity, the pore spaces, the air spaces within the soil, affect aeration, affect movement within that soil. Then we're also going to look at the density, or the bulk density of the crop, of the soil. If we're going to take an equal measure, toisa ivu muruoko, toisa rimwe ivu muruoko, anogona kusiyana ma-weight because akasiyana nekuti akafomewa sei. That's the bulk density, and it has an implication on the uptake of nutrients. It also has an implication on water holding capacity. And obviously, we're also going to be looking at the color because it's also influenced what organic matter is in the soil, within organic matter or not, iron oxides which emanate from the rocks. When the soil is being formed, weathering mvura inenge ichinaya, reactor nerve to form iron oxides. So basically that then forms or contributes to the color of the soil, putting into those such elements. So, the previous slide. Right. So the importance of understanding the physical properties, the equity, kuna change the CEC. CEC is not cation exchange capacity. And you'd realize that when a ginger farama red clay soils because it's because the high CEC, the ability yema soils to store nutrients within the soil. So in a high CEC, does it mean that farmer understand the soil higher yields same clay soil? Quite a series. If you put in the necessary measures, more a higher CEC that includes biological matters, that include your organic material, manure, decomposed material, murakwane, will be able to come up with a sandy soil in a higher CEC. It takes up my nutrients, and it should be able to develop my crop sense. It also has an influence on the water holding capacity. Is also about irrigation scheduling. What exactly are you going to be doing in terms of number one, the choice of irrigation, and also the frequency of irrigation? Of course, there is ADMA, evaporation pans, and also my sensors which can be put into the field to measure the evapotranspiration rates. But it's important to understand how the soil texture works, and also the herbicide application. I'm sure I could probably a basic product saying atrazine. Makaona application rates from 3 to 5 liters per hectare. It's because when you apply a herbicide, it has to be taken up from the soil solution. Saka, apply, first of all, we need to satisfy my soil colloids, saturate my soil colloids, iwayo, ne herbicide iyoyo. Kana chinga azara, then there is free or excess herbicide molecules, kwanza kuti zotora nechi, and then we'll be able to control. Muka apply, 3 liters per hectare, pane sora denge richida 5 liters per hectare. Definitely you will not get good control. So it's really important to take note and understand the soil profile yagamira say physically. But it also then goes on to say, per choice tillage equipment no shandisa. Tunobashandisa tillage equipment yagata say. Zionga equipment no shandisa very heavy equipment and then end up near tiny compaction. And you would also need further heavy equipment to plow deeper to visit that compaction layer. Because compaction you are going to have challenges to do with penetration yema roots within the soil profile, especially for the deep-rooted crops. And you are also going to have challenges with aeration, which will result in waterlogging. Assuming at a certain phase, due to the El Nino, you are going to have waterlogging, drainage properties. So you then need to start looking into some conservation works. Next slide. So for the chemical properties, we are going to look at those 4 elements. Number 1, pH. For pH, tingorne 2 sides of it. We've got the acidic side, we also have the alkaline side of the soil. It's important for farmers to appreciate that most crops, they do well in a pH range of 5.5 to 6.5. Though my potatoes and a few other crops can do well below 5.5. So the choice of your crop that you would want to put into the soil, it also helps determine to what extent do you want to adjust your pH level. And it also has an implication on the nutrient content in the move. Within the soil profile. If you look at those NKSZ, Nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, they are the major elements for crops. We want those ones in bulk quantities. Then you also have your secondary elements, your sulfur, your magnesium, but those ones, yes, not in fairly large quantities, but they are needed. And also you have the trace elements or the micro elements, which then include zinc, iron, copper. Those elements that are needed in very small quantities or minute quantities, but they are very necessary for us to be able to satisfy my requirements a crop. Saka, if you then have, if you then appreciate what quantities of zinc do I have in my soil, you can then make a decision. Per basal fertilizer, am I going to be putting in a zincated product or not? Am I going to be coming in complementary foliar fertilizers or not? And also the type. Then the soil organic matter, compostable material. If you look at Tegana Paspemiti, pane murakwana wakawanda, pane kuorera kwakawanda, and you find kuti ivhiro tikaribata rinenge riri very friable, and probably tikatochera pasi, you can even see activity yema earthworms. It shows how rich the soil is because of the soil organic matter mashizha ari kuorera. So we can simply replicate the same model, toitora toisa mumunda, kuti the previous crop residues, we can put those ones mumunda. Toita incorporate, we increase the organic matter within the soil, and we also increase nutrient retention. Then cation exchange capacity, tamboy kurukura. And the next slide. So the importance now, a truckload of 30 tons within this room, assuming probably it's 300 square meters, you will not be able to get even 10 tons as long as your pH is not correct, because the crops can simply not perform well within a pH range negative optimum. Remember I said the optimum pH range for most of these crops is between 5.5 and 6.5. Though some crops can perform just below or just above that range, but this is 5.5 and 6.5 accommodates a wide range of crops. So it's important for us, for farmers, to be able to understand what the pH edu say how then do we adjust, because tikazoisa munhu angaisa truckload yake ye fertilizer here nemunhu angaisa probably 500 kgs of a particular product per hectare. You would realize kuti with 500 kgs anokwanisa kutokohwa zvakanyanya kudarika munhu angaisa that 30 tons because of conditioning, which is the knowledge which you want. So pane anodzi nutrient requirements a crop. Requirement echibage, requirement yema potatoes, requirement yema oranges inosiyana in terms of the proportions of your NPK as well as the trace elements. So once you know what the crop requires, we then calculate accordingly kuti imimi kana mchida kuti achieve 5 tons, 8 tons, 10 tons, 15 tons. What quantities of basal would you want to apply? What quantities of top dressing would you want to apply, and in what form, at what stage? That on its own, I'm sure takambonzwa mbiri yemunhu akaita 21 tons pepe. Anditi? Azvigoni kuti munhu awane yield target yakadaro uchiisa masaga mashoma per hectare. So it's important to understand the crop nutrient requirements. This is basa remadumeni rera rechambotaura kuti tinge tichita macalculations waya and help each other understand the crop removal rates to satisfy what the crop requires to be able to deliver a ton of yield. Then soil organic matter incorporate the organic matter in the soil. We improve nutrient holding capacity. We also improve the water holding capacity of the soil. Organic matter yakanakira pakuti inobatsiridza kubatanidza masoil colloids kuitira kuti kana to increase porosity, to improve water holding capacity. But kuti zvikwanisike izvozvi pane nyaya inonzi yema microorganisms, soil microorganisms. My soil microorganisms, we know them. They are there in the soil. Some of them, there are some we can see, there are some we cannot see by the naked eyes. But those which we cannot see, they include my bacteria, they include the fungus, and it's important for the farmer to understand that kune are beneficial, kuna siri beneficial, because we know very well that if you take a sample to the lab, probably you know that crop yard because it has been affected by bacteria or by a fungus. But for those that are beneficial, they help in breaking down the soil organic matter, and also to do with the balance, carbon sequestration, Tinoziva kuti carbon ikaonesa within the atmosphere then leads to climate change. So there has to be some kind of a cycle inenge iripo, bringing back that carbon into the soil, into the water bodies, because ikazoramba yakawanda, there is no panenge pasina balance, and then that imbalance, it upsets the ozone system and many other causes. Saka, sometimes if we burn macrop residues, we are simply putting back that carbon through the carbon monoxide into the atmosphere, which we should simply be incorporating into the soil, then it's broken down, nema soil organic matter. Next slide. Now, looking at the biological properties, well, tambotara paya kuti is to do with what's in the soil. Pane nyaya yema nematodes, pane mites, pane millipedes, pane earthworms anenge arimo, some of which are beneficial, some of which are not what are beneficial, they are parasitic, and for that we can come in with some control measures so that those crops are not affected by the parasitic organisms. Next slide. The importance of understanding biological properties. Number one, kune nyaya yema cycles. Carbon, there is also to do with phosphate. Phosphate inoita recycled through living and non-living organisms, those materials that are dead and decaying, in the sense that when the soil is being formed, reaction with iron, there is also reaction to do with phosphate, and particularly when it's incorporated with calcium. That's when you have elements, calcium, and then with your phosphate. But that phosphate, when it's released into the soil, is then taken up by the crops. Plants weeds kana kuti feed inenge ichikura within that soil inenge ine nutrients iwayo. They are then converted into digestible material, zvobuda as dung or animal waste. Then they are brought back into the soil as phosphate. So munozona kuti nutrients iwayo that is for phosphate. We are cycling the phosphorus, but you can also do the nitrogen cycle, where we are saying kune nyaya kuti you want to have atmospheric nitrogen brought into the plants, particularly for legumes. I'm sure kuti vazhinji tinonzwisisa nyaya concept yekuti kwanzi shandisa rhizobium and then you minimize on using your top dressing fertilizer. That is simply tapping into nature kuti Mwari wakatipa those beneficial microorganisms, where you are taking the nitrogen from the atmosphere, it is converted into the available form for the crops. But my microorganisms anota denitrification, anota nitrification, so that at the end of the day, kana vichinge zvaorera munozona kuti crop iyo benefita. So you would also realize that which affect or the decisions that you are going to make are going to be based on what? On in terms of crop rotation, they're going to be based on the choice of material. Kana tichinga tadyara legumes takuchinjawo tasira nitrogen yakawanda takuisa cereals, probably takuchinja toenda cucurbits, toenda kumasolanaceous crops. But my biological properties, you would also realize decomposition works well, improvement of soil structure and water holding capacity we have mentioned. Then we also have the soil conservation. Soil conservation is key because part of our generations, we need to keep the soil very well for posterity. You remember, if we don't take care of the soil, it's not deplete, or we end up losing much of the soil, and it becomes very unconducive for us to be able to do cropping. If you've had my situations, I've got 80 hectares. Of that 80 hectares, probably 65% of it is it's arable. It's because the other part are necessarily in the rightful state for us to be able to do the farming practices. So we need to conserve that soil, because it takes over a lifetime to be able to renew 1 centimeter of soil. That takes about 250 to 3,000 years to regenerate 1 centimeter of soil. So my decisions that in our farmlands are important. We know they must be put in place. The knowledge we've got, but implementation. How do we implement, or we choose not to? But if we choose not to, it means we are killing the next generations. Next slide. So we've got different soil conservation techniques. Number one, the crop rotation. You need to come in and understand.
Mr. Dzidzai, 10 minutes to go.
All right. You need to understand the categories, yema, or the families, yema crops, yema solanaceous crops, yema cereal crops. Nyaya kuramba tichita monoculture, tinenge tichikanganisa, and so that we benefit from what each of the crop residues that were incorporated into the soil. It then benefits the next crops, and you have a very good cycle inenge well optimized. You also have to do with cover cropping. Abatora nyaya ngodyara kutira kuti midzi yema crops aya tadyara ma grasses kana ma legumes irambe yakabatwa nema cover crops area, and you have reduced runoff kana kuti soil erosion because they are bound together, and waste kana mina organic matter, the soil colloids are well formed, and tora nemvura zvekuchimbidza. Next slide. You also have reduced tillage, minimum tillage. The concept here, I'm sure most of us we do understand it, because this is what the government has been promoting, the Pumvudza concept, and it's been working well. And for most farmers, especially the small scale farmers, but for the commercial farmers, there is tillage equipment that you can then come in and use to be able to do minimum soil disturbance to retain a moisture much better, and also have the crop residues and mulching on that part of the crop. Then for those farmers vanonga kuma areas asina orientation and topography isina kunatsa kunaka, kune makomo, we can do contour farming, we can do terracing, and within those tinokwanisa kuita ma-tide ridges ekuti atite hold in some moisture isabva yaramba ichimhanya, because tinongotaura nyaya kuti kumakomo handiti ivhu redu naturally kana mvura yakanaya iri in excess is going to swipe away mvura yakadini the top soil zvichiramba zvichidaro, and over the years that soil is not going to be optimum for crop production. So we need to be putting in place these practices. Let's remember kuti kune private players that are able to help us with conservation works. Let's remember kuti kune the government employees who are able to help us with the conservation works, particularly DDF and Agritech. Vanogona kutodzidzisa kuti makandiwa anotemiwa sei, ma-storm drains anogadzirwa sei, and we can then conserve the soil. Next slide. Then there is an issue to do soil testing. This is a very key thing for every farmer to understand. Because it then helps you determine the soil fertility levels of the soil fertility levels, and particularly to do with planning of your fertilization program. You don't need to apply excess, you don't need to buy more fertilizers, because you can apply optimally and get very good yields depending on your nutrient management plan. Let's go to the next slide. So in terms of the parameters that are generally analyzed, you can do your pH, YEG, pH, then you can also look at these other elements, the NPK, and a bit of the secondary and micro elements. Then there is also what you call the premium package. We're going to be looking at the pH, the premium, the pH, the macro, and secondary, and an abundance of trace elements. What then? This then helps to come up with a good quality crop, particularly for those that are probably doing fruit production, that are doing flowers. There is a particular elements that have got to be supplied to be cropped for it to be able to reach a top-notch quality. So you then need to do and address my crop nutrient needs according to this. Next slide. Right, and the next slide. When sampling the land, you demarcate your area in a manner equal. You can do it because of the uniformity or previous cropping history of your crop. And the best time you could teach soil sampling or analysis. Soil sampling is soon after harvesting your crop, because a personal activity. If you sample during the time your crop is growing, you have a bias that some of the nutrients have not been extracted, so it does not give a true picture. But when sampling, you need to come up with at least 10 sub-samples using a trowel, an auger, a spade, or even a handle. Next slide. Those are the methods that we can use to employ for you to be able to collect your soils. You can collect using the Z method, the M, or whatever. But the depth has got to be 20 to 30 centimeters. That includes the topsoil and as well as the subsoil. Next slide. So Once you have collected the multiple points, you then mix the soil together thoroughly, and you then come up with the composite sample just of about 500 grams to 1 kg. Next slide. What you need to do, remember, you do after harvesting, you need to keep a record of your cropping history for you to be able to make good nutrient management decisions. What you should not do is to put in my soil samples within my empty fertilizer bags, because it then gives a bias. Musatora zvakare pane churu kana kuti panojenga mvura, because panenge pane churu pane ma excess nutrients, panenge pachijenga mvura panenge pasina chikafu chakanaka. So you need to have a true picture of the soil. Next slide. The MC is now on my back. So the soil amendments, we are looking at gypsum, which is your calcium sulfate, that is the composition. We're also looking at your calcium, calcitic lime. It's called calcium carbonate because it has more of the calcium carbonate ions more than the magnesium carbonate ions. But then the dolomitic lime in Zakari, 40% of your magnesium carbonate. So the choice here lime, the recommendation comes from the proportion calcium and magnesium between integrated within that particular soil. If you are going to be putting in my soil amendments, your trace elements, you come in with your foliar fertilizers, which you then apply to supply my deficient iron, zinc, and iron.
3 minutes to wrap up, Mr. Tizai.
Okay.
3 minutes,
right.
Please.
Let's move on to nutrition. The next slide. All right. My fertilizers, they are made in different forms. They can be straight fertilizers, they can be compounds, they can be blends, or even custom-made fertilizers. Custom-made fertilizers in the sense that Matora soil sampling analysis has been done. We then say, instead of using the usual 7-14-7 or 6-20-30-23, we customize the soil according to what your crop requires. That is customization in my fertilizers. Next slide. So that has been highlighted before to do with the 4R principle: the right source, the right rate, the right time, and the right place of your fertilizers. Next slide. Those are your fertilizers for your cereal crops. The reason I put those ones in bracket, the zinc in brackets, is because you can have double D with zinc, and you can also have double D without zinc. So for those farmers with sandy soils, you are mostly recommended to use the zincated basal products, because most sandy soils, they lack zinc. Let's go on to the next slide. Those are for the solanaceous crops, your tobacco and horticultural crops, tomatoes, potatoes. Next slide. Then these are for the oil crops, your cotton, your soybean, your sunflower. Next slide.
I am tempted to say thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that should be my lesson. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tizai. Ngativape epampam.